and welcome to this week's episode of the Goodrum Show with me, Chris Goodrum. Okay, as per usual, a big thank you to everybody that commented, liked and especially viewed last week's episode of the show. I hope you all enjoyed it. It certainly seems that from the comments and what have you that there's a lot of love out there for the English distillery. Or for the St George's distillery, I should say. Anyway, so that's really cool. But today we're looking at something completely different. Yes, as you probably see from the title page, we're looking at a number of own label Lidl bottlings. Now, for those of you that don't know, Lidl is what's the word they use? A discount supermarket chain, which seems to be sort of making inroads into the dominance of Tesco's and what have you, and generally speaking, they're doing it on price. Now, their strapline says, you know, something about, you know, quality and price and all that kind of stuff, and well, shop at the Lidl just down the road, so you know I've got no issue with their groceries, I was at the final round of the World Whisky Awards a few weeks ago in London, and on my table was a lady called Maya, who I believe heads up the marketing department for Lidl's wines and spirits and what have you, and asked if I would kindly do an episode of the show on their range, and I said, well, yeah, no problem. As you well know, I'm quite happy to do reviews of anything. You send me it, if you want me to do a review, okay, I'll do a review. So I said, yeah, send me some samples, and well, as you can see, generous sized samples indeed turned up in the post, so thank you very much for that. Now, let's talk about own label bottlings for a little while. I've seen some really scathing reviews online of supermarket own label bottlings, and I mean, I was looking at one the other day, which I won't say who they were reviewing, but the guy just basically said acetone, all I can get is acetone, and went on to say why the whiskey was absolutely rubbish, it was horrible, you know, etc, etc, and you know, it kind of occurred to me that a lot of these reviewers just blatantly just say it's rubbish, are kind of already in that mindset. They've already made up their mind in essence before they've actually tasted the juice, I think, or that's what it appears. And it's, you know, they're playing to a captive audience. Bash the supermarkets, why not? They're, you know, it's cheap and nasty, it's got to be, you know, and this is it, you know, they think because it's inexpensive, it's got to be completely rubbish, you know, and there's no balance. There is no sort of like say, well, hang on a minute, is this good value for money, etc, 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 and you know, I mean, there's always going to be batches and variations and all that kind of stuff, and you know, the Queen Margot 8-year-old in the 2019 World Whisky Awards was indeed a category winner. I believe it was blended whiskies 12 years old and below, and it beat some, you know, well-known blended whiskies. Now, I didn't taste the blended whiskies from that year's World Whisky Awards, so I couldn't tell you whether it was better than the ones that it was facing in the competition, but obviously those people that did indeed taste the blended whiskies thought that was indeed the case, and yes, maybe you could argue that it was, you know, just a freak blend, that they somehow managed to get hold of some really good components, or is it that they've got the buying power to basically go and buy this sort of stuff, you know, and so anyway, what I'm basically trying to say is that I've got no preconceived agenda at all. Obviously, Maya said to me, if you think they're absolutely god-awful, please don't review them. And, well, obviously I'm reviewing them, so we can naturally assume that they're not god-awful. But, like I said, you know, I'm quite happy to basically sort of take an objective view of these particular bottlings, and like I said, when you do them blind, as in the samples for the World Whisky Awards, it's a huge leveller. You know, packaging, name, it all becomes a complete and utter irrelevance, because all you can focus on is the juice in the bottle and score it accordingly. So so anyway, I think that's probably enough waffle. Let's take a look at today's lineup. Right, like I said, incredibly generous. We're going to kick off with this one. This is the 3-year-old Queen Margot blend. It is a blended whiskey, not a vatted whiskey. Although I don't think the 3-year-old actually exists, I think it's been now replaced by a no age statement bottling. That is really ballsy, it has to be said, to stick 3 years old on your label. I mean, alright, maybe you could argue that some of the consumers wouldn't really quite understand the whole aging concept of whiskey, and so therefore it's fairly irrelevant to them whether it's 3 years old or 33 years old, but it's still pretty ballsy putting 3 years old on the label. Second bottling we'll be looking at is, like I said, this is the Queen Margot 8-year-old. So again, an 8-year-old blend bottled at 40%. Number 3 we're going to move on to is this one. This is called Glen Orchy. It's a 5-year-old blended malt. So now the interesting thing is that all of these bottlings, bar this particular one, are bottled by a company called the Clydesdale Scotch Whisky Company, which I'm led to believe is kind of Lidl's bottling arm. This one isn't. This one's actually bottled by Ian McLeod Distillers. So, well, you would have thought that's got to be good quality. Then we're going to move on to the 3 Ben Bracken bottlings. We're going to kick off with, not that one, that's the Highland. We're going to kick off with the Spey, then we're going to move on to the Highland, and then we're going to finish on the Islay. As you can see, all darkly coloured. Shake test doesn't seem to imply caramel, so probably some sherry casks at play in there. And, well, you know, these are all really competitively priced. I mean, you know, the single malts, they're all what, £17.50 or £17.49 or something of that ilk. I mean, phew, and these are even less expensive. But anyway, we'll talk about each of the individual ones when we get to them. So let's start off with the 3-year-old Queen Margot. So, first off, like I said, the 3-year-old doesn't seem to exist anymore, and it's been replaced by a no age statement bottling, which retails for £10.99. £10.99. I mean, you may remember I did a review of I forget the name of it, Aldi's young blend, which retails for roughly about the same price, and you know, kind of reverse worked out what it would actually cost them, and it, you know, we're talking pence. But again, anyway, we're not talking about that, we're talking about this one. So like I said, it's a 3-year-old. Let's see what the nose gives us. Okay, it's a lot of grain, and honestly, frankly, I wouldn't have expected anything less. You know, to sell for that kind of price, you're talking somewhere in the region of what, 70, possibly even 80% grain. It's a little industrial, there's a little roughness to it, I will say. A little bit of herbal notes. The grain actually feels quite evolved for 3 years old. I'm wondering whether this grain is actually 3 years old, or whether it's a bit older and it's the malt component that's probably 3 years old. And that malt does remind me a bit of Glen Rothes, it has to be said. So I don't think the quality is there. It is of that style of distillery, you know, the slightly more industrial distillery like Glen Rothes. There's a bit of vanilla, there's some herbal sherry notes. I mean, it's 11 quid. I mean, you know, I'm not going to lie to you and say it's the greatest blended whiskey I have ever tasted, but bearing in mind it's £11 a bottle, can't argue with that. See what the pal's like. It's a bit short, it's a little astringent, but it pretty much mirrors the nose. Predominantly grain, a little bit of sweet vanilla, a little bit of possibly sherry dried fruits, slightly industrial again. I wouldn't say it's a dirty whiskey by any means, you know. It's slightly industrial, but that I think is the character of the malt that they have used. And like I said, wouldn't surprise me in the least if it was something like Glenrothes or maybe, well, could even be Dufftown, probably unlikely. Glenrothes does seem to sort of get around in a lot of these blends, and you know, it is what it is at the end of the day. You know, it's not earth-shattering, but it is certainly not dreadful by any shot. Okay, so let's move on to the 8-year-old. Let's see what the nose gives us on this one, shall we? Again, similar to the 3-year-old, plenty of crisp grain, a little deeper, obviously showing a little bit more maturity. There's some honey, vanilla, barley, malt. You know, it's, I mean, you know, this is retailing for £12.99. I mean, for an extra couple of quid, I mean, you know, you are going certainly up the quality level, and you know what? That's not a bad nose. It's, again, like I said, it's not exactly going to sort of, you know, blow you away with oodles of complexity, but you know, for 13 quid, I mean, it is perfectly acceptable in my opinion. So it passed like. Again, opens with a crisp grain, honey, barley, malt, caramel, vanilla, a little bit of dried fruit. Again, absolutely no problems with it at all. Respectable blend in actual fact. Again, I don't think it's, well, I mean, the thing is with blended whiskies, you know, people like blended whiskies because of their intrinsic style. I mean, so you have the people like Johnny Walker that love lots of oak, and so on and so forth. You know, and so I can see people actually sort of saying, yes, I really like this because it's not bad. The components are okay. It's again a little industrial, but I think that's the style of the malt that they've actually chosen to use. And well, like I said, for sort of like 13 quid, you can't go too far wrong with that. If you really are on a budget and you want an inexpensive bottle of whiskey, there you go. Okay, so let's move on to the Glen Orchy. So this is a blended malt. I think it's blended malt, not single malt. Yes, it's a blended malt Scotch whisky. It's 5 years old and bottled at 40%. See what the nose gives. You know what this reminds me of? 12-year-old Highland Park. Obviously not quite as old as the 12-year-old, but you know, it has that rough Highland Park kind of character to it. You know, it's there's some herbal barley, there's some industrial barley, there's some malt biscuits, there's a little bit of smoke in the background, but it really does remind me of Highland Park. You know, it is, shall we say, that style. And I think if you quite like 12-year-old Highland Park, which I can't say I'm the world's biggest fan, you would probably be quite happy with this. And again, this is not an expensive whiskey, it's $13.99. Personally, I think I would probably have the Queen Margot 8-year-old over this, but then that's because I'm not the world's biggest fan of 12-year-old Highland Park, as you well know. Or distillery bottling of 12-year-old Highland Park. Yeah. Anyway, let's see what that's like. it's a little neutral. Again, comparisons with slightly rough Highland Park I think are very valid. There's some barley, some caramel, there's a little astringency on the finish, a little bit of peat smoke. Yeah, I mean, it's okay. And I think, like I said, if you like distillery bottled 12-year-old Highland Park and you are on a serious budget, then, you know, that is certainly going to fill the gap, if you see what I mean. Personally, if I had the same amount of money, I would go for the Queen Margot 8 over this. But that's just sort of personal preference. Right, okay, so let's move on to the first of the 3 Ben Bracken bottlings. This is the Speyside single malt, bottled 40%. Let's see what those gives. Quite aromatic, it's herbal, again it's slightly industrial. Wouldn't surprise me if this was another Glen, to be honest with you. There's some barley, there's some vanilla. I mean, overall it's pleasant enough. I mean, it's sort of, you know, says richer style of Speyside. We're not in your crisp grassy sort of style of Speyside. I think there's some obvious sherry dried fruits, not a huge amount, probably refilled. I mean, it's got some nice honeyed notes. I mean, again, you know, it's very much of that style, and yeah, it's okay. See what that's like. A little lighter on the palate, not quite so dense. Bit more industrial barley. There's some honey, there's some dried fruit, a touch of lime, a bit of grapefruit as well. Length is okay. I mean, it's not the longest, it's not ridiculously short. It's okay. Again, I'm sort of finish is slightly industrial with the sherry notes. I mean, it's a little bit of bittering, but you know, again, it's not exact. It's not sort of. It's not horrible by any stretch of the imagination. It's not mega complex, but it's okay. And you know, again, let's take this into consideration. This is 17.5 quid, and you know, if you're on a budget, to be bloody honest with you, I have tasted a lot of, you know, a lot of more expensive Speysides that taste a damn sight worse than that, shall we say. So I think that is probably a bit of an endorsement, I think. Okay, so let's move on to the Highland. Let's see what the nose gives us on this end, shall we? A little fresher, still a bit industrial. There's some praline, almond, a bit more minerality, again some cherried fruit. Do you know, we could almost be what, Glengoyne maybe, you know, I mean, sort of, obviously not, we're not talking sort of like loads of first fill Oloroso, which is, even if the casks were damn awful, you certainly wouldn't get first fill Oloroso for this kind of money. I think it's, again, refilled cherry, there's a bit of licorice, some bitterness from the oak. Again, I mean, you know, it's not earth-shattering, but it is not bad, you know. It's a case of, well, you know, if you like Glengoyne or you know, that style of whiskey, you know, then you know, again, this is not, you're not going to hate this, all I can say. So that's right. Not quite so fresh and minerally on the palate. It's a little, I wouldn't say caramel flattened, but there's a lot more caramels, and I'll give it the benefit of the doubt that that is actually oak rather than E150. There's a little bitterness, a little bit of astringency again. There's a touch of dark chocolate, some tannin. Again, you know, if I was tasting this blind, I would certainly be thinking maybe Glengoyne or something of that kind of ilk. Reasonable length. I'm getting a little bit of green fruit coming through on the finish. I mean, again, you know, if this is the sort of whiskey that you quite like, then, you know, and you're on a tight budget, again, I keep saying it, you know, these are, you know, not expensive whiskies, and, you know, they have, I wouldn't say deficiencies, they are very much what they are, complexity wise, but I think if you like the particular style, well, yeah, fine. Okay, and so finally let's move on to the Bracken Islay. Let's see what the nose gives us on this end, shall we? You know what, you can't really go too far wrong with a bit of peat and sherry, can you, at the end of the day? You know, pretty much, you know, unless it's come from the bloody mid-80s, then, you know, I mean, I think this is sherried Bunnahabhain, peated Bunnahabhain. You know, let's put it this way, you know, pretty much all the distilleries on Islay are producing quality whiskey, quality malt. So, you know, and the market is, there's a lot of it out and about, and you know, it's perfectly acceptable. It's probably the best nose of the three. It's tarry, it's sherried, it's peated, it's slightly meaty, it's not industrial, it's quite clean. Again, not very old, but not lacking in interest, shall we say. Bit of iodine, orange, walnut. I mean, you know, this is actually, I think, a very good nose. And again, £17.50, I would have absolutely no problem with picking up a bottle of this. See what it smells like. Herbal, tarry, peaty, sherried, a touch of malt, black pepper, vanilla, sherried fruits. I mean, you know, again, what's not to like about this? That certainly feels like peated sherried Boona. It's certainly not Beg or Lagavulin or anything like that, and I don't think it's Kalila. It certainly doesn't kind of have that Kalila-y kind of, doesn't say Kalila to me, all the Freud. So process of you know, elimination, I think you're only kind of really left with Bunnahabhain. And so, yeah, alright, we know Bunnahabhain can be a little bit hit and miss, but this is perfectly acceptable. In actual fact, I would go as far as saying it's actually really quite pleasant. Certainly I remember tasting one of the older bottlings of Bracken Islay that they did. I mean, this was always the thing with Lidl. Come Christmas time, they sort of get hold of these ridiculously old parcels of and bottle it up for not an awful lot of money, and everyone's going, wow. And yeah, okay, again, you sort of have to say, temper one's expectations, but you know, if you're going to pick up a 25-year-old Islay for, you know, next to nothing, then, well, you know, always worth a punt. And to be honest with you, this is definitely worth a punt. Again, if you're on a budget and you like your peated sherried whiskies, then you will have absolutely no complaints with that whatsoever. So yeah, actually pretty good. Right, okay, so let's sum today's episode of the show up. So, Lidl's own label bottlings. They're not as bad as you might think, to be honest with you. And, you know, like I said, I think when you review inexpensive whiskey, whether it's supermarket own label bottlings or, you know, what have you, you know, you have to keep a sense of perspective. You have to keep a sense of, you know, what are they retailing for? Because at the end of the day, all blended whiskies are made to a price point, and so, you know, they are engineered almost to a certain extent. You know, it's a case of, you know, blender Smith sits in his lab and says, right, I need to put a blend together that's going to retail for, you know, 13 quid, okay, that kind of leaves me with very little options about what I can put into it, you know. And you know, the Queen Margot 3-year-old, yeah, it is what it is. Just, you know, if you don't expect too much, you're not going to be disappointed. And this is, like I said, this is the big problem with these reviewers that sort of, like, you know, think they're being really clever and what have you, and just by saying, well, it's rubbish, you know, they're kind of missing the whole point. Personally, the 8-year-old Queen Margot I thought was a perfectly acceptable blend, you know, and like I said, for the money, don't have an issue. Can't say I'm a big fan of the Glen Orchy, I mean, but that's because I think it's Highland Park and it's rough. And but if you like that, then, well, you're not going to complain about that. The Bracken range, again, you know, £17.50. You know, what are you going to get with that, you know, in reality? The Highland and the Speyside were both perfectly acceptable. The Islay I thought was very, very pleasant, and I would have no issue with drinking that. And so there you have it. You know, it's like if you are on a budget, or you are starting off in, you know, to explore the wonderful world of whiskey, then supermarkets are going to probably be a starting point. It's logical. We go there all the time, you know. And one hopes that these are then springboards to, you know, customers exploring a little bit further, maybe saying, okay, well, if I up the budget a little bit, do I get a bit more, you know, and so on and so forth. And I don't think they're bad at all. And like I said, I think I've tasted a hell of a lot worse, and they've got damn sight bigger price tags than these. So yeah. Hopefully, you won't be too upset with my reviews. I don't think I've been too. You know, I like to think that, you know, at the end of the day, these are honest reviews and balanced. You know, I try and do my reviews as balanced as I like my whiskies. But anyway, so that's this week's episode of the show in the bag. Hope you've enjoyed it, and all I have to say is good afternoon and good ramming.